Hello, my fair friends. I'm Ruby Ruse, this is Baby Bunny, and welcome to Fairy Fortunes. On today's show, we will be continuing our series on the ABCs of mythology. If you missed my previous videos, I will have that playlist linked down below, so I hope you will check those out. I do also have linked below for you a whole set of resources if you enjoyed this topic and want to explore more about it. I hope that you will look up some of those links that I provided for you. So in today's video, we are continuing with the letter H. And today, H is for hero. So in mythology, though, those stories that we hear again and again, that we readily associate with, sometimes the goddess or the god or the supernatural being is not the central figure of that traditional story. It's the hero. So if we think of those great Greek epics, the Aeneid, the Odyssey, the Iliad, these are all stories that don't necessarily focus on goddesses and gods. They are prominent and important characters, but the protagonist of those epic myths are not those supernatural divine beings. They are a human hero. So now, sometimes demigods often feature as the heroes. Perseus, in the modern version of Perseus is, of course, Percy Jackson, is a demigod, meaning that one of his parents is a god and the second parent is a human. Another example of a demigod being a hero is Hercules. And another example of that from a non-Greco-Roman tradition is the hero of Gilgamesh that I talked about in C is for cultural appropriation. So I will have that video linked down below. And of course, I will also have the full playlist of this series so far. So I hope you will check those out. So, and what's interesting is that not just because your one parent is human and one parent is a god, that doesn't necessarily determine whether you will be a hero or a god. The god Mercury, the messenger god, actually had a human mother, but yet he was immediately promoted to level of god, whereas Hercules, who also was the son of Zeus, was not considered a god, at least not right away. He was considered a human hero. So there is another argument that great heroes are gods. So I'm going to reference again one of my previous videos. In A is for Arthurian mythology. I talk about King Arthur, and I talk about him in the context of being a god, not a legend or a hero, but actually a god. And there are many references to more ancient versions of Arthur where he is Arturo, the bear god, a sun god in the sun in the sky, that kind of thing. So sometimes the heroes are gods, and sometimes actually heroes become gods. In example, Hercules, who I just spoke of just a moment ago, was actually promoted to being an Olympian god after his mortal death. So his function is in some stories he's considered the god of luck and rescue, and in other stories he's considered the god of sports and health. But in any case, after his mortal death, he becomes a god. So the hero is very much tied, is an important element of mythology. Another example that I have of this is that it has actually been speculated that the god Thor was some type of human hero, that much like in the case of Hercules was then worshipped as a god after his mortal death. So that's another example of the hero taking on these godlike stories and their legends becoming mythology. So we're riding the veil again, riding that veil. So when we look at the element of hero as it pertains to mythology, why is a hero important to mythology and not simply a legend? Well, in some of these cases, for example, King Arthur is definitely considered a legend in that people truly believe that this was a person who lived in the physical world and his body is somewhere buried in Wales or England or possibly in Ireland and Scotland. So they believe that he was an actual person who died and lived. But what about the people, like for instance, Hercules isn't necessarily considered a person that actually lived. Like we don't have any cases of, oh, this was the staff of Hercules. Oh, this was the lion skin that Hercules wore. We don't really have anything like that occurring in our modern times now. So Hercules doesn't really fit the definition of legend. Likewise, what's interesting is Jesus could be defined as a legend because unlike, as I just explained, we don't have the lion skin of Hercules, but we do have the shroud of Jesus. And so we have elements of legend flowing into Christian mythology. And by the way, you'll notice that even though most people kind of consider myth and mythology as something that is not true, you'll notice that I do not refer to it in that way. I see mythology as a collection of stories that are of religious or cultural in nature. And so by that definition, any religious traditional story, anything that has cultural significance, to me is a mythology. So I refer to the stories of Christianity as Christian mythology. So in that, going by those definitions that I just clarified, is Jesus mythology? Is it a religious story, or is Jesus a legend? And there again, we're riding that veil. Those two definitions have some correlation. Not quite interchangeable, but definitely a lot of overlap. So, and even the omnipresent Judeo-Christian body of myths have numerous heroes who feature as the prominent protagonist in a traditional story. So we have the story of Noah, which I talked about again in the C is for Cultural Appropriation video that I did. And we have tons of heroes. David, who fights the Goliath. We have all of these characters who are human creatures, human beings that are the protagonists. They are the main feature of those myths. It's not necessarily the goddess, the god, or the supernatural being that is featuring as the prominent character, the protagonist in those stories. So what does that all mean? That's the greater question that we're trying to address in H is for hero. Well, I think that mythology, as I talked about before in previous videos, is that mythology, legends, folklore, all of these things are ways that humanity is able to give context and meaning to natural and social phenomena. It is a way to bring in understanding and acceptance. And so what does the hero teach in that context? Well, I think that mythology is... the purpose of mythology is the overarching theme of humanity encountering the divine and the supernatural. That is what mythology is. And some of the most tantalizing tales featured in mythology are horrifically tragic. For example, the Orpheus legend, the Orpheus mythology that I spoke of earlier, Orpheus does not get to have his wife back. She stays in the underworld. The god Balder stays a ghost in the underworld, because these stories are about the inevitable. It's about helping to garner meaning. It's helping to come to a position of acceptance of these happenings in the human experience. And I think that dealing with those powerful emotions, those tragic happenings, these stories then teach how to face these challenges and all this adversity with grace, coming to a place of understanding, of coming to a place of acceptance, that this is a social and natural phenomenon, and how you face it with grace, how you come to appreciate that this is how fate flows. These stories also teach acceptance, but they also teach defiance at the same time, which for me is so brilliantly connected to the Fae, because I often talk about the Fae as being both and neither at the same time. Fairy creatures don't understand the concept of good and evil, because we are both and neither of those things at the same time. And that's what mythology teaches. It teaches acceptance and defiance, both and neither, simultaneously. Because in many of the great myths involving these human heroes, the hero is aware of his fate, and that fate is that he will die. But he fights anyway. He both embraces the outcome and perseveres at the same time. They accept their fate and yet refuse to give up. That is the purpose of the hero in mythology. It is to teach possibility. And the message that I want to leave you with this topic of H is for hero, is that these human heroes, they are all templates for you. I want you to know that you are currently, right now, the hero of your own mythological story. You are the hero in this ongoing fate that you have with all of your encounters with the divine and the supernatural. And you are capable of greatness. Yes, you. We are all capable of greatness. Never forget that. And with that, have a fairyful day.